Untold Physio Stories is part of the all-new PT Podcast Network. Find a new favorite podcast by an amazing PT content creator at ptpodcastnetwork.com. Welcome to Untold Physio Stories Podcast, your perfect commute resource with physio failures, successes, interesting cases, and more from the physio and rehab world, with your hosts, Drs. Andrew Rothschild and Urson Religioso. The future of medical documentation is here, and it's revolutionizing the way we record patient visits. Introducing Comprehend PT, the groundbreaking HIPAA-compliant AI scribe designed specifically for physical therapists. Imagine a world where the dialogue between PTs and patients is interpreted by AI into precise, real-time medical notes without lifting a pen or tapping a keyboard. Comprehend PT does just that, allowing healthcare professionals to stay engaged with patients rather than buried in documentation. Boost your efficiency, reduce claim denials, and liberate yourself from the burdens of manual note-taking with Comprehend PT. Join the revolution now at comprehendpt.com. Untold Physio Stories listeners get 50% off their first month with code MMT50, and there's a free trial available. Sign up now. I use it every day in the clinic for virtual and live visits. I just speak to the patient, and at the end, hit Comprehend, and a SOAP note's generated. I love it, and you will too. Welcome back to Untold Physio Stories Podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Dr. E, with Modern Manual Therapy, Edge Mobility System, and my all-new online private network, The Eclectic Approach. Check that out, modmt.com/members. I'm here today with Dr. Brian Fischer, and you can give a quick intro, Brian, and I think he's going to tell his story about why he went out of network / cash-based. How's it going today?
Doing well. Thanks a lot. How are you doing?
Great. So what do you got for us?
Yeah. I've been a physical therapist since about 2019. But prior to that, I was a business owner doing sports massage therapy and strength and conditioning, working with cash pay physical therapists. So even before I was a PT, I kind of got to see that model and how it worked before I even saw the typical insurance model. So I guess I could say I was spoiled from early on to see what good clinical care was like one-on-one. And being massage and strength and conditioning, I was used to being one-on-one with clients. So once I got through PT school, unfortunately, as soon as I graduated, COVID hit, and I ended up having to go into the insurance-based model just to get a job. So the thing that I was avoiding the most, I ended up having to go into it for necessity reasons. And then I also completed a sports residency program for 1 year, which I was also in a typical insurance model. So for 2 years, I had to be in that system, which made me not much of a fan of it, but for necessity reasons, I had to do it. So as soon as I finished my residency program, I went right back to cash pay. So now I've been doing that, I guess, on and off for the last 7 to 10 years between physical therapy and also massage therapy and strength and conditioning services. And right now, currently, I'm working on here in Reno, Nevada, building out a cash pay injury prevention in-house medical program with first responders. I do a lot with athletes and a lot with fire and police officers. So that is kind of how I got here to this point. More than happy to elaborate more on what you want to hear, but I would never change it for anything in the world. I think cash pay is the best way to go for what we do.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say also, before I went cash-based, I was in the insurance world, but I still did one-on-one, which is really hard. I mean, I don't necessarily think that insurance-based equals lesser quality care. I just think people, obviously, one, they're more compliant when they pay you top dollar, right? People who pay maybe a $20 copay or have no copay even, they have less of incentive. But I mean, I just made a lot less money, but I was still always one-on-one. It's really hard, especially in Buffalo, New York. I mean, our reimbursement is terrible. Some of the worst in the nation. Every time I teach in a different place, I'm like, oh, what's your reimbursement like? What's your reimbursement like? And I hear ours is like maybe up to like in the mid 50s now. But like when I was doing it, it was like the average reimbursement was 30 something, 37, I think, when you factor all in everything together.
Right. And yeah, if I were to say anybody who wants to go cash pay out there, I mean, I was just tired of being dictated on how I can treat my patients. I mean, I get a referral for one body part when I know as a clinician we want to assess, the whole body and how they're related, and I would have to get multiple scripts for multiple body parts. So I was dictated by how I can treat. I was dictated by how much time I had with the patient. If I had to see 2 or 3 people in an hour, I knew that time was ticking, especially if they showed up late. So by the time you do your subjective and objective, maybe you put your hands on them for a little bit and maybe you can get through 1 or 2 exercises before they're handed off to a tech and or a PTA, which unfortunately that's how the system is sometimes, and it's got to be done to keep the lights on. But I was always felt that I could not provide what I got in this profession for. I love building relationships with patients. I love to be able to take my time and really hear their story and do all the skill sets that I feel like I can provide for them. And I always felt like I was handicapped with that. And sometimes there's been pushback when people hear, oh, cash pay, I can't take insurance. But once a patient sees the experience that they get, that someone is really with them to that extent, and you're basically part of their family one-on-one with them, and they know they can email me, text me, call me, they know that I'm part of their medical team at any point and not just part of a giant caseload. They see the value in it. And I feel if I can give a good care in those first few visits, I don't need to see them 2, 3 times a week, and their copay starts adding up. They know that they have a program. I'm an advocate for their care, and I don't need to see them as often. So I'm there for them, and virtually as another option. I can always do telehealth visits if something comes up, but they don't have to deal with the system. They can see me the next day. In Nevada, which is great, direct access, no restrictions in the state, so I can really get to see someone right away. I think also I work a lot with sports athletes, and the amount of ACLs I've had to rehab where insurance gets cut off at 4 months and I need to see them for a year. Being a strength coach, I can transition them right into a strength and conditioning program. Or I know if they're an athlete that had an elbow surgery, I want them in the gym training with me to keep them strong and healthy while they're rehabbing their elbow. And a lot of times insurance is not going to reimburse that. Why are they training this person's legs when they have an elbow surgery? So the fact that I could be hands on with them 100% with no restrictions, I think everybody sees the value in it. And that's been my experience for the last 10 years.
Great. It's something else unique you mentioned too is about being a massage therapist and a strength coach first before you were a PT, and how automatically you're used to a one-on-one model. And I always think that's great for those professions, but I think it's terribly sad for physical therapy because patients, I mean, I know that I've had like even relatives, like particularly my wife's side, where like they didn't even know it was a degree, much less like that we're doctors now too, because their experience with it is they get handed an exercise card, and you very much seem like a tech. And you go through all this school, you build up all this debt, you become a doctor, only to be basically patients like just they don't even know your name, like, oh, where'd you go to oh, you had PT before, where'd you go? I don't know. Or yeah, it was someplace, but oh, who'd you see? I don't remember. It's like, do they not? I always tell patients like, I'm probably gonna be unforgettable whether you liked me or not, because I'm the only one you're gonna see. But yeah, I used to always think like, what, do they just have bad memory or something, or no? But it's just because I mean, there's a lot of therapists in Buffalo who see people like 4 people an hour minimum. When I was doing my residency, I was saying 4 people an hour minimum. You're talking about people coming in late. It didn't. And when people came in early, that stressed me out too. People came in early and late. I saw a patient every 15 minutes. Every 15 minutes, they were put on my schedule. I could have 3 people walking in at once and they all expect care.
Mm-hmm.
That was bad.
Yeah.
I mean, you're like, oh, 2 or 3 people an hour. I'm like, man, that's no problem for a lot of the mills in Buffalo.
Yeah. And, during the residency, it was the silver lining of the residency is coming from that years of experience being one-on-one. My mentors would drill me on how to be more efficient because of the patients that come in all the time. So I do feel, my clinical skills definitely accelerated because I had to get to the point of a good assessment and take a good subjective quickly. So now coming out of it, now I feel like I have the best of both worlds, but it was more of I had no other choice. I had to figure it out. So I always try to take a positive out of those experiences, or if you're a new grad and need to get your reps in. but I just also know that, the documentation side of things, I felt like I'm always treating a patient to appease an insurance company what they need to see on paper versus, and then I don't know about you, I'm sure you had to spend a lot of days doing documentation before, during lunch, and after. And now I have the freedom to be more with my patients because I don't have to be so thorough with my documentation to appease, insurance companies. I still do my documentation,
I know people are like, "Oh, you're
still
cash pay. You don't do
ethical. Yeah.
documentation, right?" I'm like, "No, that's illegal. Like, you
Yeah.
still have to have a medical record, and it doesn't mean I'm any
Correct.
necessarily less thorough. I just have more time to do it, you know?"
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Correct.
but I don't know. Like I remember when someone was getting on my back once about not doing outcomes measures, and she's just like, "Oh, where's the data? How do you know your patients are better?" I'm like, "Because they say they're better." Like, what? I mean, if someone's like, "Oh, I have a 10 out of 10 low back pain and I can't deadlift, and now it's 0 and I can deadlift, what am I going to do? Do I have to give them oswestry to like believe
Mm-hmm.
them?" I mean, I can like, I have eyes, I have ears. There's no reason for them to lie to me.
Right.
I don't want to like hassle someone by having them fill out an oswestry and NDI. I mean, I see the value in all those things too, but I my bias also is because I used to work as a clinical peer reviewer. I saw so much abuse of outcomes questionnaires that I'm like, I don't care if they're valid and reliable, but when patients and providers have an incentive to get more visits, they have some kind of financial incentive. Patients often exaggerate on them. Oh, I'm doing a little worse. And I even said it before I was a clinical peer reviewer, I was committing abuse, not necessarily fraud. The difference between abuse and fraud is that abuse, you're doing something illegal. You don't know it. Fraud is you're doing something illegal and you do know it's illegal.
Mm-hmm.
I would tell people like, hey, like I know you have a 2, but the insurance is probably going to cut you off because you're a 2 out of 10. Why don't you just say you're a 4 or 5 out of 10? Like I would just say like score a little bit higher than you should. And then, but I saw that like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cases. I mean, there was even companies in New York that I won't name that they specifically gamed our system. They knew that like every single patient scored the max amount that they could on the first visit, and then when it came to re-up a certain amount of visits, because we were algorithmic based on how well they scored on an SF 36, an oswestry, and an NDI. So they figured out like, oh, if someone scores too low, it's this amount of visits. If they score like this medium amount, it's like maybe you'll start off with 7, then you'll get 5, then you'll get 3, then you'll get 1 or something like that. So I realized by looking at all the submissions over and over again for this particular company that every patient was scoring the same
Mm-hmm.
at like every point of care. And I'm like, man, they're just gaming the system. And like, they didn't even get kicked out of the network because they were too big, but they should have been kicked
Yeah.
out of the network.
The outcome measures is a tough one just because I feel like a lot of those questions I'm going to ask during my subjective anyways. And then you're really looking at a snippet in time on that particular day, how they're going to score. They could have woke up with bad shoulder pain and then they want to score that completely different than they were, a month ago when I asked the same questions, but I know that they're doing better, but that's what they had to put on their score. So it gives me a snippet of their life, but I feel like, again, I'm doing it because I got to check a box when I'm talking to the patient in front of me and I have the time to get to know them, I can ask those follow-up questions. It's not so cut and dry. Just answer the specific question because the outcome measure says so. So it has its place sometimes,
I feel like they have their place in research. I feel like they do not have a good place, at least according to all the abuse and fraud that I've seen. I just hated it. I just knew that people were gaming the system or exaggerating.
Sure.
Yeah.
And one other thing I want to touch on just about the cash paid journey is I feel like we say as physical therapists we should be the movement experts, right? We are the ones that you should come to for your musculoskeletal injuries, but I remember in school, at least, we don't really learn a lot of strength and conditioning principles. We don't really learn how to really train people at a high level. I did have that background ahead of time, so that did funnel into my TheraX, but we don't learn those types of skills. And if we do have it, again, we're pushed back with, I don't have the time to do it because the insurance company is not going to reimburse it, or I don't get to spend an hour with my patient, even if I have the opportunity to, give my skills. So that's why I tend to spend a lot of time on injury prevention side of things. Is that if I can do if I can have the opportunity to be on my own, I can really give them programs to not be injured in the first place. I want to be an advocate for their care to not let a small tweak become a big injury. Or when I work with my firefighters and police officers, I don't want them to go on workers' comp. So can we do things like upgrade your training program, fix that cranky shoulder? And I think when we have the freedom to do that, we have the education to do that, we'll see a lot of our medical injuries and surgeries and injections and medications go way down. So I think we're doing a disservice in general, being kind of stuck in that model, the temporary, the typical medical model.
Or like it's like a reactive model.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like
Exactly.
wait till someone has pain. I know. I mean, even when I graduated a long time ago, 25 years ago, someone wrote this great article, and I remember bringing it to one of my CIs. Like, what do you think about this? And it was like, we should follow the dental model, right? We should just see people regardless of whether they have symptoms or not, because you can find things that may potentially lead some sort of asymmetry or stability deficits or strength deficit or something that, depending on their activity or sport, could potentially lead to something, right? And why not be proactive about that? And they're like, that'll never fly. And I'm like, here we are 25 years later, and it's still not a thing. People are doing it, but I mean, it's not a regular thing.
Right. And that's where my membership site's going to be, it's just started to get launched, is that I built up a good base of clientele of people that was in California and now in Nevada, where I want to be part of their medical team once a month. So if it's out of sight, out of mind, I don't know what's going on with you, but if you could be part of my family, my team here, let's check in once a month. It could be rehab, it could be some strength program, but having me there as part of your team. I mean, people will go to see their chiros for, adjustments to keep their body right. They might get a massage once a month for body work. Why can't a physical therapist be part of your team for injury prevention, or, handle something that's going on when it is a little bit of a tweak or a problem? So that's what I've been pushing for. And hopefully our profession sees that there's a big opportunity for that we can all provide more for people around here.
Yeah. I have one last thing to comment too. A long time ago, my old podcast, like, that was more interview format, and this ended up being more of like that too, and less of a story. But Chad Cook was on, Chad Cook, the researcher, he was on there, and we were talking about just like students not having the ability to prescribe exercises. And this is something he actually said off the record, but there's a lot of podcast gold that happens when you stop hitting, when you hit that stop button and you're not recording anymore. But I said, hey, anecdotally, Chad, what I found as a orthopedics instructor was that the students always complained, even when I was a CI, like, oh, we don't learn enough exercises. We don't learn enough exercises. And it's like, they feel like that's what clinicals are for, like to learn exactly what to do. But I'm like, and my argument as both a PT instructor and a clinical instructor was that you literally learn every muscle. You learn the origin insertion, you learn what they do. Then there's another book entirely that tells you exercises of what to do for specific muscle groups and maybe even surgeries and everything. And then you say you don't know what to do. But literally you passed gross anatomy, right? So you know all the origins, insertions, and the actions of every muscle. So you do know what to do. And then you also probably took exercise physiology, which you learned the overload principle. So you actually know that these yellow TheraBands aren't going to do much unless like that is overloading someone who's like super atrophied, right? So we were talking about this, and I was like, well, my experience is that students who actually work out and strength train are the ones who are best at programming for their patients. And Chad's like, yeah, that's been my experience as well, but it's not something that you would ever say out loud.
I would agree.
Really, we are supposed to know, because you even said, oh, we don't learn much about it. And I would say, no, we don't learn it like a strength coach does, but you do learn everything that a strength coach knows, other than maybe like obvious progressions and like Olympic lifts and things like that, like classic lifts. We don't learn those things, but we know the overload principle. We know what muscles do, so we should know how to strengthen them, right? We should is the key.
Yeah,
really.
Well, I remember just through school, they kept saying, we got to pass the boards, you got to pass the boards. And there's an element of learning the didactics and then pass that exam. And then how does that relate to a patient in front of you? And seems to be a disconnect, even when I've seen students where they can't get that clinical reasoning side to what I've learned in school and how do I apply it. And maybe it just takes a mentor to kind of unlock that piece of it. Because you're right. I mean, the base knowledge is there, but where does that transfer into clinical care? So that's kind of one of the things. And I had great rotations. I was around a ton of athletes, and I had the foundational knowledge, but it takes It takes a lot of years. I will tell students, I'll tell other PTs, go shadow the strength coach for a little bit, get out of our bubble and see other professions. And then you'll start to see that, okay, this is not as complicated. Obviously strength coaches, that's their main profession, but there's a lot of crossover. That blend, it's really just where they are in their recovery process, but the programming can be pretty similar.
For sure. Yeah. All right. Well, anywhere people can find you on social media?
Yeah, so Instagram, it's Fischer Health, Fischer Health. And then also my website is fisher-health.com.
All right.
It has all my stuff for all my websites, my LinkedIn, everything else. You can find me there as well.
All right. Hey, thanks for coming on, Brian.
I appreciate the opportunity. It's great to chat with you. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem. Hey, if you guys enjoyed this podcast, you have a similar story, interesting case, or big physio failure, make sure to DM me, hit me up on social media, and come on the podcast. Also, please rate Untold Physio Stories 5 stars wherever you listen to podcasts: Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher. And as always, you guys have a great day.